The sun was blazing down on Rodeo Drive, casting a golden glow over the lineup of luxury boutiques. Inside one of these high-end stores, a young retail associate named Jin was arranging a new display of designer suits. She had been working at the boutique for 3 years now, and she took pride in maintaining its pristine appearance. The store's marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, and the air was filled with the supple scent of expensive leather and designer perfume. It was that slow time of day, just after lunch, when the store usually had a peaceful lull. Jin was chatting with her co-worker Raj about their weekend plans while straightening the already perfect rows of silk ties. The store's regular customers were usually easy to spot. They walked in wearing outfits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying shopping bags from other luxury stores down the street. That particular Wednesday afternoon felt like any other, with the gentle hum of classical music playing through hidden speakers and the occasional clicking of heels against the polished floor. Jin had already helped 3 customers, all of them dressed impeccably in designer wear. She had just finished wrapping up a $5,000 purchase for a local business executive when the bell above the door chimed softly. Looking up, Jin's perfectly practiced welcome smile faltered slightly. A man had walked in wearing what looked like clothes from a thrift store, faded jeans with worn knees, a simple black t-shirt that had definitely seen better days, and boots that appeared to have walked through more than a few puddles. His dark hair was messy and fell past his shoulders, and his beard looked like it hadn't seen a trimmer in weeks. Did someone get lost looking for the discount store? Raj whispered behind his hand, making Jin stifle a laugh. It wasn't professional to judge customers, but this man stood out like a sore thumb among their usual clientele. He looked more like someone who should be shopping at a convenience store rather than a boutique where suits started at 4 figures. The man didn't seem to notice their reaction, or if he did, he didn't show it. He moved through the store with an unhurried grace, his eyes taking in the carefully curated displays. Jin and Raj exchanged meaningful looks as the scruffy stranger made his way to their most expensive section, where suits could easily cost as much as a small car. "Should we call security?" Raj murmured, only half joking. It wouldn't be the first time someone had wandered in looking to cause trouble. But there was something different about this customer. Despite his casual appearance, he moved with a quiet confidence, gently touching the fine fabrics with what seemed like genuine appreciation. Jin found herself watching him more closely, not just out of concern for the merchandise, but because there was something oddly familiar about his movements. The way he walked, the tilt of his head as he examined a midnight blue blazer, it tickled something in the back of her mind, like a word sitting on the tip of her tongue. The classical music continued to play softly, mixing with the gentle rustle of fabric as the mysterious customer continued his browsing. Outside, the LA traffic hummed past, and pedestrians walked by the window, their shopping bags swinging. Inside, time seemed to slow down as Jin tried to figure out why this shabby-looking man seemed so intriguing. Little did she know, this ordinary Wednesday afternoon was about to become one of the most memorable days of her career, and the scruffy man in worn-out jeans was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The next few minutes would completely change her perspective on appearances, judgment, and the true meaning of class. The story was just beginning to unfold, and the biggest surprise was yet to come. As the man moved closer to the counter, holding several expensive items, Jin had no idea that she was about to come face to face with one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, in a moment that would make her question everything she thought she knew about first impressions. The mysterious customer continued his journey through the store, and Jin couldn't help but notice how his worn boots made absolutely no sound on the polished floor, almost as if he was floating. It was strange, she thought, how someone dressed so casually could move with such natural grace. She had seen plenty of wealthy customers strut around like peacocks in their designer clothes, but this man had a different kind of presence altogether. Reg was still keeping a watchful eye from behind a display of Italian leather belts, pretending to reorganize them for the 3rd time. "Maybe he's one of those Silicon Valley types," he whispered when Jin passed by. "You know, those tech billionaires who dress like college students." But even as he said it, both of them knew this was different. The man didn't have that typical tech entrepreneur vibe, the carefully cultivated "I'm too busy to care" look that actually cost thousands of dollars to achieve. The stranger's hands moved carefully over a rack of cashmere sweaters, his touch almost reverent. Jin noticed how his fingers lingered on the texture, appreciating the quality of the fabric rather than just checking the price tags like most customers did. There was something oddly mesmerizing about watching him shop, like seeing someone read poetry in the middle of a fast food restaurant. A group of tourists walked past the store windows, their excited chatter briefly filling the space as the door opened and closed. The man looked up for a moment, and Jin caught a glimpse of his eyes, kind and somehow familiar, though she still couldn't place why. His beard might have been scruffy, but there was nothing unkempt about the way he carried himself. "Should I ask if he needs help?" Jin murmured to Rage, who was now pretending to dust the sunglasses display. It was store policy to assist all customers, but something made her hesitate. The man seemed so absorbed in his own world, so peaceful in his exploration, that interrupting felt almost rude. Just then, a well-dressed couple walked in, dripping with designer labels from head to toe. Jin automatically moved to greet them, but they barely acknowledged her presence, too busy loudly discussing their recent yacht purchase. The contrast between their boisterous entrance and the quiet mystery man was striking. The scruffy stranger had made his way to the formal wear section, where the most expensive suits in the store hung like artwork on display. Jin held her breath, expecting him to turn away from the eye-watering price tags, but instead, he began to examine them with genuine interest. His large hands, which looked more suited to manual labor than handling delicate designer clothes, moved with surprising gentleness as he checked the tailoring on a midnight blue Tom Ford suit. "Is he actually going to try something on?" Raj whispered, abandoning all pretense of working. The wealthy couple had left in a huff when they couldn't find exactly what they were looking for, leaving the store in that strange, anticipatory silence again. The man pulled out a suit in his size, and he knew his size, Jin noticed with surprise. No measuring or guessing, he went straight for the correct numbers. Another peculiar detail to add to the growing list of contradictions that made up their mysterious visitor. Time seemed to slow down as he selected a few more items. A crisp white dress shirt, a charcoal gray blazer, and a pair of tailored trousers that cost more than Jin's monthly rent. With each selection, Jin and Raj exchanged increasingly puzzled looks. This wasn't following any script they were familiar with. The sun had shifted outside, casting long shadows through the store windows and making the crystal chandeliers throw scattered rainbows across the walls. The man gathered his selections carefully over one arm, and for a moment, just a moment, the light hit his face in such a way that something clicked in Jin's mind. A flash of recognition that made her heart skip a beat. But surely it couldn't be, could it? She shook her head, trying to clear away the ridiculous thought. There was no way that this quiet, unassuming man in worn-out jeans could be who she was thinking of. Yet as he turned toward the fitting rooms, that nagging feeling of familiarity grew stronger, like a puzzle piece slowly sliding into place. What happened next would completely upend everything Jin thought she knew about appearances, celebrity, and human nature. The biggest surprise wasn't just who he was, it was how this encounter would change her perspective forever. As the man approached the counter with his selections, the real story was about to begin, and Jin had no idea she was about to learn one of the most important lessons of her career in retail. The fitting room area of the boutique was designed to feel like a luxury hotel suite, with soft lighting and plush seating for companions. Jin watched as their mysterious customer disappeared behind the heavy velvet curtain with his carefully selected items. She and Brage tried to keep busy, but their eyes kept drifting toward the fitting room. "Did you see how he knew exactly what size to pick?" Raj whispered while pretending to fold a stack of already perfectly folded shirts. Most customers spend at least 20 minutes asking about measurements. The observation hung in the air, adding another layer to the puzzle of their unusual visitor. Through the gaps in the curtain, they could see him handling the clothes with unexpected expertise. There was no fumbling with hangers or awkward struggling with sleeves, just smooth, practiced movements that spoke of someone very familiar with fine tailoring. The classical music playing overhead switched to a piece from Mozart, filling the store with delicate piano notes. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the street in warm golden tones, and the shadows of palm trees swayed gently on the sidewalk. Inside, time seemed to move differently, as if the store had become its own little world, centered around their mysterious shopper. Jin busied herself with updating the window display, though her movements were automatic, her mind elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something obvious. The way the man moved, the gentle confidence in his gestures, the familiar profile she'd caught glimpses of, it all added up to something just beyond her grasp. A small group of tourists passed by the store windows, phones out and cameras ready, as if they were hoping to spot someone famous. This was common enough on Rodeo Drive, where celebrities often shopped. One of them pressed their face against the glass, peering in, before being pulled along by their companions. The sound of the fitting room curtain sliding open brought Jin's attention back inside. The man emerged, still in his casual wear, but carrying the suits and other items he tried on. His long hair fell forward slightly as he checked the tags one more time, and something about the gesture made Jin's heart skip a beat. That movement, she'd seen it somewhere before, perhaps dozens of times. Everything fit well, she found herself asking, her professional tone carrying across the quiet store. The man looked up, and their eyes met in the mirror. His smile was gentle, genuine, and startlingly familiar. "Perfect," he replied, his voice soft and warm, with a hint of something that made Jin's mind race. She'd heard that voice before, she was sure of it now. But where? Movies? TV? Her thoughts tumbled over each other as she tried to place it. Rage had given up all pretense of working and was now openly watching as the man made his way to the counter. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching the silver threads in his beard and the warm brown tones in his untidy hair. He moved with that same fluid grace they'd noticed earlier, like a dancer trying to blend in with the crowd. As he approached the counter, Jin noticed more details that seemed out of place with his casual appearance. His posture was perfect, but not stiff, the kind of natural elegance that comes from years of being in the public eye. His hands, though calloused, moved with deliberate care as he placed the items on the counter. The total would be well over $20,000, but he hadn't even glanced at the price tags. The store felt eerily quiet now, with even the background music seeming to fade away. Jin began to process the sale, her fingers moving automatically over the register while her mind raced. Every movement the man made, every quiet word he spoke, added another piece to a puzzle she was just beginning to solve. He reached for his wallet, not a designer brand, just a simple, well-worn leather bifold. Something about the gesture, the way he tucked his hair behind his ear as he did it, made everything suddenly click into place. Jin's fingers froze over the register as realization dawned. The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis as her brain finally made the connection. The gentle voice, the graceful movements, the kind eyes, they all belonged to someone she'd seen countless times on movie posters and magazine covers. Someone known not just for his acting, but for his legendary kindness and humility. As she stood there, processing this revelation, she realized that the biggest surprise wasn't who he was, it was how blind she'd been to what really mattered. The next few moments would teach her a lesson about judgment and humility that would stay with her for the rest of her life, and change the way she looked at every customer who walked through those doors. The moment of recognition hit Jin like a wave, making her fingers tremble slightly over the register keys. The man standing before her, dressed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, was none other than Keanu Reeves, star of The Matrix, John Wick, and countless other blockbusters. Her ears began to ring as memories of all the whispered comments and judgmental looks from the past hour came flooding back. Rage, who had been reorganizing the same drawer of pocket squares for the 10th time, suddenly dropped an entire stack of silk handkerchiefs. The soft thud broke the spell, and Jin watched as her coworker's face transformed from confusion to shock to mortification in the span of seconds. They had spent the better part of an hour quietly judging one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows caught the silver in Keanu's beard, and now that Jin knew who he was, she couldn't understand how she hadn't recognized him sooner. Those kind eyes that had captured audiences worldwide were the same ones that had been carefully examining their merchandise. The gentle voice that had delivered some of cinema's most famous lines was the same one that had quietly asked about their suit collections. A group of pedestrians passed by outside, their chatter muffled by the store's thick windows. Inside, time seemed to stand still. Jin's hands moved automatically through the sale process, while her mind raced through every interaction they'd had with him. Had he heard their whispered comments? Had he noticed their judgmental glances? The thought made her stomach twist. But Keanu himself seemed completely at ease, as if being misjudged was something he was used to, or perhaps didn't care about at all. He pulled out his credit card with the same humble grace he'd shown while browsing the store. There was no hint of superiority, no trace of offense at their earlier behavior. If anything, he seemed almost amused by the situation. "Would you like these delivered to your hotel?" Jin managed to ask, proud that her voice remained steady despite her internal turmoil. She'd asked this question hundreds of times before, but never to someone whose movies she'd grown up watching, someone whose posters had decorated her college dorm room. "No need," he replied with that famous half-smile that had charmed audiences for decades. "I can take them with me." His voice was exactly like it was in the movies, warm, gentle, and somehow both powerful and humble at the same time. It was surreal to hear it in person, especially after spending an hour thinking he was just another lost shopper who had wandered into the wrong store. Rage had recovered enough to start preparing their signature gift wrapping, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out sheets of thick, cream-colored paper. The rustle of the paper seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet store. Through the windows, the sky had taken on the deep golden hue of late afternoon in Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Jin couldn't help but notice how Keanu watched Raj wrap each item with genuine interest, as if the simple act of packaging expensive clothes was somehow fascinating. There was no trace of impatience or celebrity attitude, just quiet appreciation for another person's craft. It was exactly the kind of behavior that had earned him his reputation as one of Hollywood's most grounded stars. The total came to just over $23,000, a sum that would have made most customers at least blink. But Keanu signed the receipt with the same casual ease he'd shown while browsing, as if the amount meant nothing to him. Yet there was nothing showy about his behavior, no flashy display of wealth. If anything, he seemed almost apologetic about the time it was taking to process everything. As Jin carefully placed the last wrapped package in their signature shopping bags, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the store's mirrors. The scruffy-looking movie star in his worn jeans, the embarrassed sales associates in their designer uniforms, all surrounded by the luxury boutique's crystal and marble decor. The image seemed to perfectly capture the irony of the situation. The lesson wasn't lost on her. Here was one of the most successful actors in Hollywood, known as much for his kindness and humility as his talent, being judged by retail workers for not meeting their expectations of how a wealthy person should look. The real wealth, she was beginning to understand, had nothing to do with designer clothes or expensive accessories. It was about how you treated others, regardless of how they treated you. What happened next showed exactly why Keanu Reeves had earned his reputation as one of Hollywood's most genuine stars. Instead of ignoring the awkward situation or acting superior, he did something completely unexpected. He started making conversation. His voice was warm and friendly, as if he was chatting with old friends, rather than people who had been judging him just moments before. "You know," he said, helping to gather the shopping bags, "I once worked in a store like this." The casual comment hung in the air for a moment as both Jin and Raj tried to process the fact that not only was Keanu Reeves speaking to them, but he was sharing a personal story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the store's marble floors, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Jin found her voice first. "Really?" she managed, trying to imagine a young Keanu folding clothes and helping customers. The mental image was both surprising and somehow perfect at the same time. "Yeah, back in Toronto," he continued, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Learned a lot about people there, about how everyone has their own story, you know." The words weren't delivered as a lecture or a rebuke, just a gentle observation shared between people who understood retail work. Rage, who had been frozen in place since the revelation, finally moved to help with the bags. His hands were still shaking slightly, but Keanu pretended not to notice. Instead, he asked Raj about how long he'd been working at the store, showing genuine interest in the answer. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on topics like favorite movies. Raj blushed when admitting his love for The Matrix, life in Los Angeles, and even the weather. What struck both employees was how Keanu seemed genuinely interested in their responses, asking follow-up questions and sharing his own thoughts with surprising openness. When a young couple walked into the store, Barely glancing at the seemingly scruffy man by the counter, Keanu's eyes twinkled with amusement. He shared a knowing look with Jin and Raj, acknowledging the irony of the situation without saying a word. It was clear he had experienced this kind of judgment before and had learned to find humor in it rather than take offense. "These suits," he said, gesturing to his purchases, "they're for a charity event next week, supporting children's hospitals." He didn't say it to brag or to justify his expensive purchase. It was just another piece of casual conversation, but it added another layer to their understanding of who he really was beneath the casual clothes and untamed beard. The crystal chandeliers overhead caught the last rays of sunlight, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls. Outside, the busy street was starting to quiet down as the shopping day drew to a close. Inside, time seemed to move at its own pace as one of Hollywood's biggest stars continued to chat with two starstruck retail workers as if they were old friends. He asked about their dreams and aspirations, listening intently as Jin nervously mentioned her interest in fashion design and Raj talked about his hope to become an actor someday. Instead of offering empty encouragement, he gave thoughtful advice based on his own experiences, speaking with the kind of wisdom that only comes from years of navigating both success and failure. When Jin apologized for their earlier behavior, he waved it off with a gentle smile. "We all make judgments sometimes," he said softly. "What matters is being open to changing them." The words weren't delivered as a sage piece of wisdom, but rather as a shared understanding between people who had all been on both sides of prejudice at some point. The whole interaction lasted maybe 15 minutes, but it felt both longer and shorter somehow. Every word and gesture from Keanu seemed designed to put them at ease, to bridge the gap between celebrity and retail worker, to transform an awkward situation into a meaningful connection. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange glow through the store windows, both Jin and Raj realized they were experiencing something rare. A moment when reality exceeded expectations. He was a man who could have been justifiably angry or dismissive of their earlier judgment, instead choosing to respond with kindness and understanding. It wasn't just about being nice. It was about showing what true class really looks like. As Keanu gathered his purchases, the conversation took an unexpected turn that showed just how genuine his interest in others really was. He noticed a small sketch pad partially hidden under the counter, one where Jin occasionally doodled dress designs during quiet moments at work. Instead of ignoring it, he asked to see her drawings. "Oh, these are just rough ideas," Jin stammered, her face flushing as she reluctantly pulled out the worn sketchbook. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it to show some of her recent designs. The evening sun streaming through the windows cast a warm glow over the pages, highlighting the pencil strokes of her fashion sketches. To her surprise, Keanu took genuine interest in the drawings. He asked thoughtful questions about her inspiration, the materials she would choose, and the practical aspects of construction. It wasn't the polite interest of someone just being nice. He actually seemed fascinated by the creative process, sharing stories about costume design from his own movies. "You know," he said, carefully turning a page that showed a particularly detailed evening gown design, "I worked with some amazing costume designers on The Matrix. The attention to detail, the way they brought ideas to life, it's not so different from what you're doing here." The comparison made Jin's heart skip a beat. Here was one of Hollywood's biggest stars comparing her simple sketches to the work of professional designers. Meanwhile, Raj was carefully packaging the last of the purchases, trying to make each fold perfect despite his still shaking hands. Keanu noticed his nervousness and started sharing funny stories about his own awkward moments on movie sets. "Everyone drops things sometimes," he said with a gentle laugh after Raj fumbled with a shirt. "You should have seen me trying to handle props during my first few acting jobs." The store's closing time was approaching, but time seemed to have lost all meaning. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the scene as Keanu continued to engage them in conversation. He asked about their favorite local restaurants, then shared some of his own recommendations, not the expensive, celebrity hotspots, but small, family-owned places that served authentic food with heart. When another customer walked in, this one dressed head to toe in designer labels and barely concealed their disdain for Keanu's casual appearance, he handled it with remarkable grace. He simply stepped aside with a polite nod, exchanging an amused glance with Jin and Raj. The moment perfectly captured the irony of judging someone based on their clothes. The charity event, he explained while waiting for his credit card to process, it's for children fighting cancer. Sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest difference in someone's day. He shared this information not to brag, but as part of the natural flow of conversation. He went on to talk about the importance of giving back, about how success meant nothing if it wasn't shared with others. The total came to $23,450, a sum that would have made most customers at least blink. But Keanu signed the receipt with the same casual ease he'd shown while browsing, as if the amount meant nothing compared to the cause it was serving. He even insisted on helping carry the bags, waving off their protests with a simple, "I've got it." Throughout the entire transaction, he continued to share little stories and ask questions about their lives. He remembered details they'd mentioned earlier in the conversation, referring back to them naturally. When Reg mentioned his dream of becoming an actor, Keanu offered practical advice about starting in local theater and the importance of studying the craft. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Through the store windows, the street lamps were beginning to flicker on, creating a magical twilight atmosphere. Inside, the boutique felt less like a high-end retail space and more like a comfortable living room where old friends were catching up. As he organized his purchases, Keanu shared one last piece of wisdom that seemed to sum up the entire experience. "You know what I've learned?" he said, his voice thoughtful. "The most expensive things in life aren't always the most valuable. Sometimes it's the moments of connection, the simple acts of kindness, that matter most." The words weren't delivered as a lecture, but as a gentle observation from someone who had experienced both the heights of success and the importance of staying grounded. The sun had almost completely set by the time Keanu prepared to leave the store. The street lamps outside cast a warm glow through the windows, and the boutique's crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars overhead. But the most remarkable light came from the smiles on everyone's faces, genuine, warm expressions that had nothing to do with celebrity encounters and everything to do with human connection. "Thank you for all your help," Keanu said, gathering his bags despite their continued protests to assist him. "And remember what I said about those sketches," he added, nodding towards Jin's notebook. "Sometimes the best designs come from the heart, not the brand name." His words carried the weight of someone who had learned this lesson through years of experience in an industry obsessed with image. As he headed towards the door, he turned back one last time. "You know, when I walked in here today, I could have been anyone. Just another person in worn-out jeans looking for something nice to wear. And that's the thing about life. We never really know someone's story just by looking at them." The observation wasn't delivered as a rebuke, but as a gentle reminder of a truth we all sometimes forget. After he left, Jin and Raj stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. The store felt different somehow, as if the space itself had been transformed by the experience. The same luxury items that had seemed so important hours ago now felt less significant compared to the lessons they'd just learned. "I can't believe we almost called security," Raj whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. Jin couldn't help but laugh, a sound that carried both embarrassment and joy. The memory of their earlier judgments now seemed like a valuable teaching moment rather than a source of shame. Over the next few days, the story of Keanu's visit spread through the store like wildfire. Other employees listened in amazement as Jin and Raj recounted not just who he was, but how he had acted. They told of his kindness, his genuine interest in their lives, and most importantly, his complete lack of pretense or judgment. The experience changed how they approached their work. Jin found herself looking at customers differently, remembering that everyone who walked through those doors had their own story, their own dreams, their own reasons for being there. The designer labels and price tags that had once seemed so important now felt like just one small part of a much bigger picture. Raj started keeping a small notebook behind the counter, jotting down acting tips and life advice that Keanu had shared. But more than the specific advice, it was the way Keanu had treated them that left the deepest impression. He had shown them that true class had nothing to do with what you wore or how much money you spent. It was about how you treated others, especially when they hadn't treated you well. A week later, they saw pictures from the charity event in the local news. There was Keanu, wearing one of the suits they had sold him, surrounded by smiling children at the hospital. He looked exactly like the humble, genuine person they had met in the store, proving that his kind demeanor wasn't just for show, it was who he really was. The boutique's regular customers continued to come and go, some still throwing judgmental glances at less well-dressed shoppers. But now, Jin and Brige would share knowing looks, remembering the day they learned their most valuable lesson in retail and in life. They had witnessed firsthand that the finest things in life couldn't be hung on a rack or displayed in a window. The story became something of a legend in the store, passed down to new employees during their training. But it wasn't just the celebrity encounter that made it special, it was the reminder that every person who walked through those doors deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance. Months later, Jin still kept her sketchbook under the counter, now filled with more designs than ever before. Keanu's encouragement had given her the confidence to pursue her dreams more seriously. She had even started taking night classes in fashion design, remembering his words about following your passion. The lesson that started with judgment and ended with understanding had become a turning point for everyone involved. It wasn't just about meeting a famous actor, it was about learning to see beyond the surface, about treating everyone with kindness, and about remembering that the most valuable things in life often come disguised in the most unexpected packages.